You know, when I was a kid, the only reason I would ever play with a bow and arrow was because of one particular movie. And that movie was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. This movie is one of my all time favourites, and I think I actually wore out my VHS tape copy of this when I was a kid. In fact, I'm pretty sure this was the first ever movie that I actually owned, as in, it was bought for me for Christmas. So, in a way, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves started me on my journey of collecting movies. And unlike all the other Robin Hood movies that came before it, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves was a much darker take on the classic story of Robin Hood. Unlike other Robin Hood movies, Prince of Thieves starts with Robin of Locksley being held in a prison in Jerusalem during the Crusades of 1194. After a daring escape with his friend Peter and Azim, a Moor who Robin Hood helps escape, played by Morgan Freeman, they escape to street level, but unfortunately Peter is fatally shot by an arrow, and his dying wish is that Robin swears to protect his sister, who just so happens to be the Maid Marian, played by Mary Elizabeth This is a tricky one. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. I believe that is how you pronounce it correctly. And you may recognize this actress from movies such as The Abyss. She is phenomenal in this movie. Azim vows to stay with Robin Hood until he has saved his life, as Robin Hood did for him. When they eventually return to England, Robin Hood finds his father, played by Brian Blessed, dead, and his servant Duncan with his eyes gouged out. And this was done by the evil Sheriff of Nottingham, who was played by Alan Rickman. Robin then makes his way to Maid Marian's home and tells her about her brother's death and that he has been sworn to protect her. But it isn't long before the sheriff's cousin turns up and chases Robin and his companions into Sherwood Forest. It's here that Robin meets a bunch of outlaws who, in other movies, would have been called his merry men, but in this movie, they do no such thing. Like I said before, this is a very darker take on Robin Hood. And what at first was a fight for vengeance becomes a battle to restore justice and freedom to the people, and foil the plans of the Sheriff of Nottingham, who wishes to take over the throne whilst King Richard is still fighting in the Crusades. This movie was funded by Morgan Creek, who saw the potential in this new take on the medieval hero, but time was of the essence as there were two other Robin Hood movies in development by 20th Century Fox and TriStar Pictures. Morgan Creek wanted Kevin Costner to play the lead, whilst Kevin Costner was showing interest in the Fox version. So, in a last-ditch attempt to secure the star, Morgan Creek hired director Kevin Reynolds, who had a good working relationship with Costner after helping him direct some scenes in Dances with Wolves, and working with Costner on a movie called Fandango. And the ploy seemed to work, as it wasn't long before Kevin Costner agreed to do this movie, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves. Although I must say, in a commentary that I listened to on this actual movie, Kevin Costner claimed that he never signed up to the Fox version as he did not like the script, but the director Kevin Reynolds remembered it a little bit differently, the way I just explained it. Now, it seems that people either love this movie or hate it, and the reviews at the time when the movie was released were not great. Kevin Costner using an American accent was not really appreciated. But actually, Costner was all for using a British accent. He actually wanted to. But the director, Kevin Reynolds, wasn't too sure and decided that Costner should deliver his lines in his own accent, something that would come back to bite him for years to come. Also, Costner's performance was hated by many a critic at the time of release, and still to this very day, some say that his performance was lazy and wooden.
Kevin Costner, sometimes using a bad English accent, sometimes speaking in his normal voice. I was completely turned off by Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The dialogue seems arch. I didn't find any chemistry between Costner and Master Antonio.
This movie was a dismal, murky disappointment for me.
I couldn't disagree more. In my opinion, Kevin Costner does a fantastic job in this role. Yes, he does speak in an American accent, but you know what? It never bothered me one little bit, and I think his performance is actually spot on. Now, like I keep saying, this movie was a much darker take on Robin Hood, but it was also fun. This meant that Costner had to juggle the more serious scenes, such as finding his father dead, whilst at the same time having to bring a fun element to the movie, to his role, the cheeky charm, and I think he actually did a brilliant job at walking that very fine line. I think Kevin Costner delivered a great modern version of Robin Hood, and dare I say it, I don't think the character has been played as well by any other actor since. Even Russell Crowe, who I love, I think is a phenomenal actor, failed to impress me in the role of Robin Hood. And ultimately, I think that movie was very forgettable. I've seen it a few times, and I have absolutely no memory of how that movie actually plays out. The only close second for me is the Disney animated version where he was animated as a fox. The costumes that the characters wear in this movie are fantastic. Now, the first costume designer was actually fired for creating costumes that were basically green tights and a pointy hat, very reminiscent of the Errol Flynn era. That's not the look the director was going for in this movie. He wanted it to be more authentic to the era, for a more modern take of Robin Hood, and I think they pulled it off beautifully. The costumes look authentic to the year of the movie that it is set in, but of course with a few liberties here and there. Because the costume designer did say that if it was 100% authentic, it wouldn't be very visually appealing. So, like I said, there were a few liberties taken here and there to jazz the costumes up just a little bit to make them more appealing to the eye. And whilst we're talking about the look of this movie, it would be a crime if I didn't mention Kevin Costner's mullet, which should not look good on most people, but for some reason, in this movie, Kevin Costner actually pulls it off. He looks great. Like I said, that hairstyle should not work, but it does. Some people might disagree with me on that, but I am all for the mullet. Kevin Costner's rocking it in this movie. But there is one other actor in this movie who completely steals the show when it comes to performance, and that is Alan Rickman as the Sheriff of Nottingham, who totally tears up the scenery whenever he is on screen. He is electric. And this movie simply would not have been the same without Alan Rickman. He is playing the sheriff as both comedic, insane, and very, very threatening, which is a hard combination to pull off, but he manages it perfectly and totally entertains whenever he is on screen. You know what? Here is a compilation of some of my favourite Alan Rickman quotes from this movie.
Shut up. Oxley! I'm gonna cut your heart out with a spoon!
Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
That's all the kitchen scraps for lepers and orphans. No more merciful beheadings. And call off Christmas.
Sorry to keep you hanging about.
Shut up, you twit!
Absolutely fantastic. I cannot imagine this movie without Rickman's performance. Without it, the movie may not have worked as well as it did. And I feel he brings a perfect balance, just like Kevin Costner does. Now, some say he steals the movie from Costner. In fact, on the DVD commentary for this movie, Kevin Costner also acknowledges that Rickman stole the movie. And yet, I really feel that Costner and Rickman's performances are both great. Now, in this version of Robin Hood, the sheriff is also aided by a witch named Mortiana, who seems to be pretty good at black magic and predicting the future. However, in the uncut version of this movie, which was released in 2003 on DVD, it's revealed that Mortiana is in fact a fraud, and she killed the true Nottingham baby and replaced that baby with her own baby, who was Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham. Quite a dark twist, wouldn't you say? And for a minute, let's talk about this version of Maid Marian, played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who is kind of reinvented as a badass, who actually challenges Robin Hood when they first meet, dressed in all black like a medieval ninja. And although she is the damsel in distress at some parts in this movie, she does also have many a moment in this movie where she proves that she is not to be messed with. And this movie was also promoted as a romantic adventure film, and the romance between Robin and Marian is believable and executed beautifully, as you see the connection between the two grow as the movie progresses. And I believe they actually grow this connection between the two, not only with the story, but with the music. And I think there is a perfect example of this in a scene that's shot with Robin and Marian on the side of a riverbank. And in this scene, they have their first kiss, and it's absolutely shot to perfection. She looks almost angelic in this scene as the morning sun illuminates their faces, and there's this mist that just rises off the water. As they kiss, the music just fills our ears, and it's been building up to this moment throughout the entire movie, to the first time they kiss. And it's just the way that the orchestra score just booms, and it just comes alive as they share that one kiss. And like I said, you just feel like the music was building up to this, and it was saving that certain part of the track until they actually come together in this embrace. And it just works beautifully. And this movie uses some very interesting shots. There are quite a lot of unflattering close-ups of the actors' faces, which actually work really well for the tone of this movie. Every bead of sweat, every drop of saliva, every bit of grime on the skin of these actors makes you feel uneasy in a way that makes you kind of feel like you're right there with the actors in the scene, and it makes the movie all that more enjoyable because it gives you that sense that you're actually experiencing it as they experience it. It's a very strange thing. Close-up shots, in my opinion, shouldn't normally work, and like I said, they're very unflattering, but for this movie, it just works beautifully. And there's also the shot in the movie where Robin Hood fires a blazing arrow as all this fire is flaming behind him, and they slow the footage down. And it's a really attractive shot. It is done to perfection. There's also another scene where Robin shoots an arrow through the forest, and you're kind of following the path of the arrow from the point of view of the arrow through the forest as it splits another arrow in two. And then there's the score to this movie, which was created by Michael Kamen. It's absolutely breathtaking. It kind of gets your heart beating. Michael Kamen also worked on movies such as Highlander and Lethal Weapon, as well as many, many more. When there's action on screen, the music that plays alongside it really does get your blood pumping, and in my opinion, the music is kind of like part of the story. I know that goes without saying, that's what the music is there for every movie, but in this movie, I really feel that it does connect with the viewer in such a great way. With every action that is portrayed on screen, there is an appropriate piece of music to make that action stand out more, and it's flawless. And I don't only mean the big action set pieces, I mean the smallest gesture, the smallest glance. The music is just ever present. The editing of this movie is tight, but sometimes loose, with some great shots that go uncut for quite some time. And I absolutely love the uncut version of this movie, the extended version, where it fills out some of the story and gives us more background on certain characters, especially Mortiana and the Sheriff of Nottingham. There is a scene in the movie where we actually see the employment of the Celts to aid the sheriff in defeating Robin Hood and his men. And I like these extra little touches that kind of fill out the movie a little bit more. But despite me saying this, despite me liking the longer cut of this movie, I must admit the movie does flow better in its theatrical format. It doesn't feel as dragged out, and it feels more punchy and a little bit more enjoyable. But me being a kid who grew up watching the VHS tape over and over and over again, the theatrical version of this movie, when the uncut version of this movie did come out in 2003 and I watched it for the very first time, it was great. It was just great to see extra bits of this movie that I'd never seen before. But like I said, it does flow better in theatrical, without a doubt. Michael Kamen's music was also used in the hit Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams, which was #1 over here in the UK for an incredible 16 weeks. And even as a child, I remember the amount of radio time that song got. It was on all the time. It was everywhere. And in my opinion, it was kind of like this music video was like an extension of the actual movie, and they kind of went hand in hand. And even now, when you hear that song on the radio, you can't help but think of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, because that's what that song is. That song is this movie. Now, it's clear to see that I love this movie. I like it very much, but I think the only negative I can say about this movie is the scene at the end where the Sheriff of Nottingham is forcing himself on the maid Marion. And it's a very uncomfortable scene, especially due to the fact that they try and insert humour into it, and it doesn't work. They try to make the scene a lot more light-hearted, and it just comes across as icky. Other than that, love this movie. This movie for me is timeless. I love it so much, and with the use of practical effects, it makes it shine, and it really is an accomplishment in itself. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I do not think there has been a Robin Hood movie that matches this in spectacle and just pure fun. It's really an enjoyable movie that I can literally watch over and over and over again and never get bored. I do love Walt Disney's animated version of this movie, the one with the fox. And of course, Errol Flynn's version is iconic. But for me, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, is legendary.